Single dad had $30 for a date. Then a billionaire's little girl changed everything. The crumpled $20 and $10 bill felt like lead in Daniel's pocket as he stared at his reflection in the restaurant's glass door. His hands were shaking, not from the October chill cutting through downtown Seattle, but from the crushing weight of pretending he belonged here. Chez Laurent. Even the name screamed money he didn't have. Hello, beautiful souls. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from, whether you're cozy at home, taking a break at work, or maybe even sneaking a quick story session like I used to do. How are you all doing today? And hey, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, you're missing out on stories that'll make you believe in magic again. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Daniel Cruz pressed his palm against the cool glass, watching well-dressed couples glide past the maitre d' like they owned the world. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, a shirt he'd ironed 3 times to hide the fraying collar, shoes polished until they almost looked expensive. Almost. $30. That's what stood between him and complete humiliation tonight. $30 that should have gone to Emma's school lunch account, or the overdue electric bill, or the prescription he'd been stretching for 2 weeks. But Sarah from the hospital cafeteria had been so insistent, so kind when she'd set up this blind date with her cousin visiting from Portland. She's perfect for you, Danny, Sarah had said, squeezing his shoulder after another 16-hour shift. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Never, he wanted to say. Not since Emma's mom walked out 3 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and the sound of 6-year-old asking why mommy didn't love us anymore. The restaurant door opened, releasing a wave of warmth scented with rosemary and expensive wine. A couple emerged, laughing softly, the woman's diamond earrings catching the streetlight like captured stars. Daniel's stomach clenched. What was he thinking? He was a night shift janitor at Seattle General, not some successful businessman who belonged in places where appetizers cost more than his daily wage. His phone buzzed. A text from his babysitter, Mrs. Chun. Emma's asleep. Don't worry about us. Have fun tonight, Daniel. You deserve this. Deserve this. The words felt foreign, almost mocking. When had he last deserved anything good? When has life ever handed him something beautiful without demanding twice as much in return? But then he thought of Emma's face this morning, how she'd straightened his tie with her tiny fingers and declared him the handsomest daddy in the whole world. How she'd made him promise to find someone who makes you smile like I do. His daughter believed he deserved love. Maybe that was enough. Daniel pushed through the door, and the maitre d', a man whose suit probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, looked him up and down with barely concealed disdain. Reservation. The word dripped with skepticism. Cruz. Table for 2 at 7:30. The man's finger traced down his list with theatrical slowness. Ah yes, right this way. They wove through tables where conversations flowed over wine that cost more per bottle than Daniel made in a week. Crystal glasses caught candlelight, casting dancing shadows across faces that had never known the weight of choosing between groceries and gas money. And then Daniel saw her. At a corner table, a woman sat across from a little girl who couldn't have been much older than Emma. But this wasn't his date. This was someone else entirely. The woman had dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist, wearing a navy dress that whispered money and power. She was beautiful, but it was the exhaustion in her eyes that caught Daniel's attention. The same bone-deep weariness he saw in his own mirror every morning. The little girl, maybe 7 or 8, was animated, gesturing wildly as she told some story that made her mother's lips curve into what looked like the first genuine smile she'd worn all day. Your table, sir. The maitre d's voice cut through Daniel's observation. He was seated 1 table away from the woman and child, close enough to hear the little girl's infectious giggle, close enough to notice how the woman's shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the world. Daniel checked his watch. 7:25. His date would arrive any minute, and then he'd have to perform the careful dance of appearing successful while his bank account screamed otherwise. He'd researched the menu online, memorized the cheapest options, practiced casual responses to questions about his career. But something about the scene at the next table held his attention. The little girl had dropped her crayon and was crawling under the table to retrieve it. When she emerged, her eyes met Daniel's, and she offered him a gap-toothed grin that reminded him so much of Emma, it made his chest ache. Mommy, the girl whispered, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. That man looks sad, like you do sometimes. The woman, her mother, glanced over, and for a moment, their eyes met. Daniel felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than attraction. It was the look of two people who understood what it meant to carry everything alone. Then the moment shattered. Daniel. A voice behind him made him turn. A blonde woman in a red dress stood beside his table, smiling uncertainly. "I'm Jessica, Sarah's cousin." His date had arrived, but as Daniel stood to greet her, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real story of his evening was just beginning at the table next to his. What he didn't know was that the woman watching him with those tired, knowing eyes was Victoria Stark, CEO of Stark Industries, worth more money than most small countries, and about to discover that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought. And her daughter Sophie was about to prove that children see truth in ways adults have forgotten. The evening was about to change everything. How do you think this night is going to unfold? Drop a comment below and let me know what you're feeling about Daniel and Victoria already. And if you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button because we're just getting started. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out Jessica's chair, hyper-aware of every movement under the soft restaurant lighting. She was prettier than her photo, blonde hair that caught the light, kind blue eyes, a smile that seemed genuine. Under different circumstances, he might have felt lucky. Tonight, he just felt like a fraud. "This place is gorgeous," Jessica said, settling into her seat and glancing around the restaurant. "Sarah told me you picked it." "Great choice." Sarah picked it, Daniel thought, but managed to smile. "I'm glad you like it." The lie tasted bitter. He'd never even heard of Chez Laurent until Sarah had made the reservation, insisting she take care of everything for his first date in 3 years. Jessica opened her menu, and Daniel watched her eyebrows rise slightly at the prices. His stomach dropped. Even she, a marketing executive from Portland, seemed surprised by the cost. What had Sarah been thinking? "So," Jessica said, closing her menu with a soft snap. "Sarah tells me you work at the hospital? That must be rewarding." Rewarding. Daniel almost laughed. Rewarding was watching Emma's face light up when he helped with her homework. Rewarding was her sleepy, "I love you, Daddy," when he tucked her in after his shift. Mopping floors and emptying trash cans at 2 a.m. while worrying about bills. That was survival. "It has its moments," he said carefully. "I work nights, which can be challenging with my daughter, but the schedule works for us." "Your daughter?" Jessica's smile brightened. Sarah mentioned her. "Emma, right? She's 6, 9 next month." Daniel's voice softened automatically. It always did when he talked about Emma. She's everything to me." At the next table, he caught a glimpse of the dark-haired woman, Victoria, listening to her daughter with the same expression he probably wore when Emma told him about her day. That bone-deep love mixed with exhaustion that only single parents understood. "That's sweet," Jessica was saying. "It must be hard, raising her alone." The familiar knot formed in Daniel's chest. This was always the moment when potential partners realized he came with complications, responsibilities, a whole other person who would always come first. He'd learned to read the subtle shift in their expressions, the way conversations suddenly steered toward taking things slow or seeing where this goes. "Her mother left when Emma was 6, he said quietly, deciding on honesty. If Jessica was going to run, better to know now before he spent money he couldn't afford. "It's been just us for 3 years. But Jessica's expression didn't change. If anything, her eyes grew warmer. "That must have been incredibly difficult. For both of you." Something loosened in Daniel's chest. Maybe this wouldn't be a disaster after all. It was, he admitted. "But Emma, she's resilient. Stronger than I am most days. She keeps me going when everything else feels impossible." At the neighboring table, Sophie Stark was coloring on her placemat with intense concentration, her tongue poking out slightly in focus. Victoria watched her daughter with an expression Daniel recognized. That mixture of fierce protectiveness and overwhelming love that came with being someone's entire world. Victoria Stark, though Daniel didn't know her name yet, was fighting her own battles. At 34, she'd built Stark Industries from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. But success had come at cost. 18-hour days, missed bedtime stories, a marriage that had crumbled under the weight of her ambition and her ex-husband's resentment. "Mommy works too much," Sophie had told her therapist last month, and the words had cut deeper than any business rival's attack ever could. Tonight was supposed to be different. A rare evening off. Just her and Sophie, trying to rebuild what her obsession with success had nearly destroyed. But even now, her phone buzzed constantly with emails, each notification a reminder of the empire that demanded her constant attention. "Can we get dessert?" Sophie asked, looking up from her coloring. "The chocolate cake looks really good." Victoria glanced at her watch. 8:15 p.m. Past Sophie's bedtime. But when was the last time they'd done something normal together? Something that didn't involve rushing between nannies and business meetings? "Of course, sweetheart," Victoria said, and Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. It was such a simple thing, saying yes to dessert, but Victoria realized how rarely she allowed herself these moments. How often she'd chosen conference calls over bedtime stories, board meetings over ballet recitals. The guilt was a constant companion, heavier than any briefcase she carried. Back at Daniel's table, Jessica was asking about his work schedule, and he found himself being more honest than he'd planned. "The night shift isn't ideal," he said, "but it means I can be there when Emma gets home from school. I can help with homework, make dinner, be present for the important stuff. During the day, while she's at school, I sleep a few hours and then, well, I try to be the dad she deserves." "That sounds exhausting," Jessica said softly. "It is," Daniel admitted, "but she's worth it. Every sleepless night, every double shift when someone calls in sick, every time I have to choose between what I want and what she needs, she's worth all of it." The waiter appeared, and Daniel's chest tightened as he watched Jessica scan the menu again. The cheapest entree was $32. With tax and tip, he'd be over budget before they even ordered drinks. "I think I'll have a salmon," Jessica said, then looked at Daniel expectantly. Daniel's eyes found the pasta primavera, $28. With Jessica's salmon at $36, they were already pushing $50 before drinks, tax, and tip. His carefully calculated budget was crumbling. "The pasta looks good," he said, hoping his voice sounded casual. "Would you like to see our wine list?" the waiter asked. "Just water for me," Daniel said quickly. "I'm driving." Jessica nodded. "The water's fine." At least she wasn't expecting wine. Small mercies. As the waiter left, Daniel caught Sophie staring at him again. This time, she waved. Without thinking, he waved back, and her giggle made him smile genuinely for the first time all evening. Victoria noticed the exchange and found herself studying the man at the next table more carefully. There was something about him, the way his whole face changed when he smiled at Sophie, the careful way he held himself, like someone carrying more weight than should be possible. She recognized that look. She wore it herself most days. "He seems nice," Sophie whispered to her mother, not nearly as quietly as she thought. "Sophie," Victoria murmured, "it's not polite to stare." But she was staring too. There was something magnetic about the quiet strength in his posture, the genuine warmth in his eyes when he'd waved at Sophie. In her world of calculated smiles and strategic conversations, authenticity was rarer than diamonds. Daniel turned back to Jessica, who was telling him about her job in Portland, but part of his attention remained on the table next to them. The little girl, Sophie, reminded him so much of Emma. The same curiosity, the same fearless way of engaging with the world. And her mother. There was something about Victoria that drew him in, a depth that spoke to the lonely parts of his soul. What none of them knew was that this chance encounter was about to become something much more significant. That Sophie's innocent observations and childlike wisdom were about to bridge two worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. The foundation was set. Two single parents, both carrying the weight of their children's happiness, both exhausted from trying to be enough, both about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that change everything. I'm already rooting for these two. What about you? Can you feel the connection building? Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen next. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how this beautiful story unfolds. The evening was progressing smoothly, too smoothly. Daniel had managed to keep the conversation flowing with Jessica, who turned out to be genuinely kind and surprisingly easy to talk with. She laughed at his stories about Emma's latest adventures, shared her own tales of marketing mishaps, and seemed completely unbothered by his careful navigation around expensive menu items. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe he could have this. A normal evening. A connection with someone who didn't see his struggles as deal breakers. Then Sophie Stark stood up. It happened so quickly that Victoria barely had time to react. One moment her daughter was contentedly coloring. The next she was walking directly toward Daniel's table with the fearless confidence that only children possess. "Sophie," Victoria called softly, but her daughter was already standing beside Daniel's chair. "Excuse me," Sophie said politely, looking up at Daniel with those wide, curious eyes that missed nothing. "Are you sad because you don't have enough money for dinner?" The restaurant seemed to freeze. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face as every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his pride crumbled in an instant. "Sophie." Victoria was on her feet immediately, mortification flooding her cheeks with color. "I'm so sorry," she said to Daniel, reaching for her daughter's hand. "She's very observant." But Sophie wasn't finished. With the brutal honesty that only children could deliver, she continued, "My mommy has lots of money, but she's sad too. Maybe you could be sad together, and then you wouldn't have to be sad alone." The silence stretched like a hell breath. Daniel stared at this little girl who had just exposed his deepest shame in front of a restaurant full of strangers, and instead of anger, he felt something unexpected: recognition. This child saw the world with a clarity that adults spent years learning to ignore. "Sophie, that's enough," Victoria said gently but firmly, her executive composure warring with maternal embarrassment. "We need to let these people enjoy their dinner." But as she looked at Daniel, really looked at him, Victoria saw something that made her pause. Instead of the anger or humiliation she expected, his eyes held a kind of wonder, as if Sophie had said something profound rather than mortifying. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. He looked down at Sophie with the same gentle attention he gave Emma. "You're very smart. You know that." Sophie beamed. "My mommy says I'm too smart for my own good." "Sometimes being smart means seeing things other people miss," Daniel said. "And you're right. I was worried about money. But you know what? The best things in life don't cost anything at all." "Like what?" Sophie asked, genuinely curious. Daniel glanced at Jessica, who was watching the exchange with fascination rather than judgment, then back at Sophie. "Like making a new friend. Like your mom smile when she looks at you. Like the way you were brave enough to talk to a stranger because you thought he needed kindness." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. This man, this stranger who was clearly struggling financially, had just turned her daughter's innocent cruelty into a lesson about compassion. In her world of corporate sharks and calculated moves, such genuine grace was revolutionary. "Sophie," Victoria said softly, "why don't you invite our new friend and his friend to join us for dessert?" The words were out before Victoria could stop them, driven by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Daniel looked up at her in surprise, and for a moment, their eyes met with an intensity that made the rest of the restaurant fade away. "Oh, we couldn't," Jessica said quickly, clearly sensing the undercurrents she didn't quite understand. "We don't want to intrude." But Sophie was already clapping her hands. "Yes, please. Mommy never has friends over, and you seem really nice." Daniel found himself caught between worlds: the careful, budget-conscious evening he'd planned, and this unexpected invitation from a woman whose presence seemed to fill the room with quiet power. He could see the quality of Victoria's clothes, the way the staff treated her with deference, the subtle signs of wealth that marked her as someone from an entirely different universe. "I'm Victoria," she said, extending her hand to Daniel. "Victoria Stark, and this is my daughter Sophie." "Daniel Cruz," he replied, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, but her skin was soft in a way that spoke of manicures and moisturizers he couldn't afford. "And this is Jessica." "Stark Industries," Jessica asked, recognition dawning. "You're that Victoria Stark?" Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. This was always the moment, when people realized who she was, when their behavior shifted from natural to calculated, when she stopped being a person and became a net worth. But Daniel's expression didn't change. He had no idea who Victoria Stark was, no concept of the empire she'd built or the billions attached to her name. To him, she was simply a tired mother trying to connect with her daughter, someone who understood the weight of raising a child alone. I don't know what that means, Daniel said honestly, but your daughter is remarkable. She reminds me of my Emma. Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The relief of being seen as just herself. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the woman who'd been featured on magazine covers and business shows. Just Victoria, Sophie's mom, someone who was figuring it out one day at a time. Please, Victoria said, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that made Daniel's chest tighten. Sophie's right. I don't have friends over. I don't really have friends at all anymore. And she clearly likes you. Sophie was already pulling an extra chair toward their table, her face bright with the kind of joy that came from unexpected adventures. Daniel looked at Jessica, who shrugged with a smile. I'm game if you are. This is definitely more interesting than my usual Portland dinner dates. And so, in a moment that would later seem inevitable but felt completely surreal, Daniel found himself moving to Victoria Stark's table. The woman whose company's stock price he'd never heard of, whose net worth could have solved every problem in his life 1,000 times over, was pouring him coffee and asking Sophie to tell him about her favorite books. As they settled into their new arrangement, Daniel caught the waiter's eye. The man approached with barely concealed confusion. Clearly, this wasn't how things usually went at Chez Laurent. We'll take the check for both tables, Victoria said casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No, Daniel said immediately, his pride flaring. I can handle my own. Please, Victoria interrupted gently. Let me. Sophie invited you, which makes you her guests. Besides, she added with a smile that held just a hint of mischief, I have a feeling this evening is going to be worth much more than the cost of dinner. Daniel wanted to argue, but something in Victoria's eyes stopped him. It wasn't pity or condescension. It was something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Sophie was already chattering away to Jessica about her school and her art projects, completely oblivious to the adult undercurrents swirling around the table. But every few minutes, she'd look between Daniel and her mother with a satisfied expression, as if she'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. What none of them realized was that this moment, this collision of two worlds, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and what it meant to be enough. The inciting incident had occurred. The careful boundaries of their separate lives had been crossed, and there was no going back. Can you feel the magic starting to happen? Sophie is definitely the matchmaker we didn't know we needed. What do you think Victoria sees in Daniel that's got her so intrigued? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're as invested in this story as I am, make sure you're subscribed because this is just the beginning. The dessert course arrived like a peace offering. Chocolate cake for Sophie, creme brulee for the adults. But the real sweetness came from watching Sophie's animated storytelling. She regaled them with tales of her art class, her pet goldfish named Einstein, and her theory that vegetables were actually alien food designed to make kids stronger so they could fight off invaders. That's brilliant, Daniel said, completely serious. My daughter Emma has a similar theory about Brussels sprouts specifically. She thinks they're reconnaissance devices. Sophie's eyes widened. She sounds really smart. Can I meet her? The innocent question hung in the air, loaded with implications none of the adults were ready to address. Victoria felt her chest tighten. Sophie rarely asked to meet new people. Her daughter's world was carefully curated, protected by security teams and background checks. The idea of her wanting to befriend a stranger's child should have triggered every protective instinct Victoria possessed. Instead, she found herself saying, "Maybe someday, sweetheart." Daniel caught the careful phrasing, the way Victoria's executive mask slipped back into place for just a moment. He was beginning to understand that this woman lived in a world with different rules, different dangers. The realization should have intimidated him. Instead, it made him want to understand her better. Emma would love that, Daniel said to Sophie. She's always looking for new friends, especially ones who understand the vegetable conspiracy. Jessica had been unusually quiet, observing the dynamic between Daniel and Victoria with growing awareness. She was smart enough to recognize chemistry when she saw it, and honest enough to admit that whatever was happening between these two had nothing to do with her. You know, Jessica said, setting down her spoon, I should probably head back to my hotel. Early flight tomorrow. Oh, you don't have to. Daniel started, but Jessica held up her hand. Trust me, I do. She smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. This has been lovely, but I think I'm the fifth wheel here. She stood, gathering her purse. Daniel, you're a good man. And Victoria, your daughter is extraordinary. Victoria rose as well, extending her hand. It was wonderful meeting you, Jessica. Safe travels. After Jessica left, the table felt different, more intimate, charged with possibilities that had been simmering beneath the surface all evening. Sophie seemed oblivious to the shift, focused entirely on her cake, but Daniel and Victoria were hyper-aware of each other's presence. She seems nice, Victoria said, settling back in her chair. She is, Daniel agreed. But, Daniel looked at Sophie, then back at Victoria. But I don't think either of us was really on that date tonight. The honesty hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. In her world, conversations were strategic, layered with subtext and hidden agendas. This man's directness was both refreshing and terrifying. No, she said quietly. I don't think we were. Sophie looked up from her cake, chocolate smeared on her chin. Are you going to be friends now? Real friends, not just dinner friends. What's the difference? Daniel asked, genuinely curious about this little girl's wisdom. Dinner friends are polite and talk about boring stuff, Sophie explained matter-of-factly. Real friends tell each other secrets and help when things are scary. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. When was the last time she had a real friend? Someone who knew her secrets, who helped when things were scary. Her life was full of business associates, strategic alliances, people who wanted something from her. But real friendship? That was a luxury she'd sacrificed long ago. Your daughter is very wise, Daniel said to Victoria. Too wise, sometimes, Victoria replied, but her voice was soft with affection. She sees things the rest of us miss. Like what? Daniel asked. Victoria hesitated, then decided on honesty. Like the fact that I'm lonely. That success isn't the same thing as happiness. That I've built this incredible life, but forgotten how to actually live it. The admission surprised her. She never talked about her personal struggles, never showed vulnerability. But something about Daniel's presence made her want to be real in a way she'd forgotten how to be. I understand that, Daniel said quietly. Different circumstances, same feeling. I spend so much energy trying to be enough for Emma, trying to make sure she doesn't feel like she's missing anything because it's just us. But sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for myself. Sophie had finished her cake and was now drawing on her napkin, but Victoria could tell she was listening to every word. Children always were. Can I ask you something? Victoria said, leaning forward slightly. Of course. What do you do? For work, I mean. You mentioned the hospital. Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest. This was always the moment of truth, when his reality collided with other people's expectations. But Victoria's eyes held no judgment, only curiosity. I'm a janitor, he said simply. Night shift at Seattle General. I clean floors, empty trash, and sanitize rooms. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and the schedule lets me be there for Emma. Victoria nodded, and Daniel waited for the subtle shift he'd learned to expect, the polite distance, the careful recalibration of interest. But it never came. That must be incredibly difficult, she said instead. The physical demands, the hours, trying to balance everything. I can't imagine. What about you? Daniel asked, though he suspected the answer would highlight just how different their worlds were. I run a technology company, Victoria said, deliberately vague. It keeps me busy. Too busy, according to Sophie. Mommy builds computers that think, Sophie added helpfully. And she has meetings all the time, even when she's supposed to be sleeping. Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly. Sophie has strong opinions about work-life balance. Smart kid, Daniel said. Emma's always telling me I work too much too. Kids have a way of keeping us honest. They do, Victoria agreed, watching Sophie color. Sometimes I think she's raising me more than I'm raising her. The conversation flowed easier now, the initial awkwardness replaced by something deeper. They talked about their children, their struggles, their dreams. Victoria found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. How she sometimes sat in her car after work, too exhausted to face another evening of trying to be the perfect mother. How she worried that Sophie would grow up thinking love was something you scheduled between meetings. Daniel talked about the nights when Emma was sick and he had to choose between staying home and losing pay they desperately needed. How he sometimes felt like he was failing her, like she deserved more than a father who counted every dollar and worried about every bill. "You're not failing her," Victoria said firmly. "Sophie saw something in you tonight. Kindness, strength, love. Children don't lie about those things." "Neither do you," Daniel replied, and Victoria felt her breath catch. "Sophie is incredible because you're incredible. Money doesn't make someone a good parent. Love does, and it's obvious how much you love her." The moment stretched between them, charged with recognition and possibility. Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the desire to be known by someone, really known, beyond her net worth and business achievements. But then her phone buzzed. Then again, and again. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing at the screen. "There's a situation with one of our overseas contracts." "I should take it," Daniel said, understanding immediately. "I know what it's like when work calls." But as Victoria stepped away to handle her crisis, Daniel couldn't help but notice the way her shoulders tensed, how quickly she slipped back into CEO mode. He was getting a glimpse of the pressure she lived under, the constant demands that pulled her away from moments like this. Sophie looked up from her drawing. "She always has to work," she said matter-of-factly, "even when we're having fun." "That must be hard," Daniel said gently. "Yeah," Sophie sighed. "But maybe if she had a friend like you, she wouldn't be so sad all the time." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel watched Victoria through the restaurant window, pacing as she handled whatever crisis had erupted. Even from a distance, he could see the weight she carried, the loneliness that success couldn't cure. When she returned, her expression was apologetic but distant. "I'm so sorry. There's a problem with our Tokyo office, and I need to go," Daniel said simply. "I understand, but we were having such a nice time," Sophie protested. Victoria knelt beside her daughter's chair. "We were a sweetheart, but sometimes Mommy has to work, even when she doesn't want to. Can we see Daniel and Emma again?" Sophie asked, and Victoria felt her heart skip. Victoria looked at Daniel, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I'd like that. If you'd like that." Daniel felt the weight of the moment, the choice that would determine whether this was a beautiful evening or the beginning of something more. Two worlds colliding. A billionaire and a janitor. A woman who had everything and a man who had nothing but love. "I'd like that very much," he said. Victoria smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her all evening. "Good. Sophie, say goodbye. We need to let Daniel get home to Emma." As they gathered their things, Victoria slipped Daniel her business card. "My personal number is on the back," she said quietly. "Call me, please." Daniel looked at the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, the kind of business card that opened doors he'd never even seen. But it was the handwritten number on the back that mattered, the vulnerability in Victoria's voice when she'd asked him to call. "I will," he promised. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Sophie hugged Daniel's legs with the fierce affection of a child who decided he belonged in her life. Victoria watched the exchange with something that looked like hope. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning, that the obstacles ahead would test everything they thought they knew about love, class, and what it meant to build a life together. But for now, it was enough that they'd found each other. The chemistry is undeniable, but can love really bridge such different worlds? What challenges do you think Daniel and Victoria are going to face? Share your predictions in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to get even more intense. 3 weeks later, Daniel's life had taken on a surreal quality that made him question whether he was living in a dream. Victoria had called the next day, then the day after that. What started as tentative conversations about their children had evolved into something deeper. Late-night phone calls when Sophie was asleep and Emma was at sleepovers, stolen coffee meetings between Victoria's board meetings and Daniel's shifts. They'd arranged a play date at the Seattle Center, watching Emma and Sophie bond over the interactive science exhibits while carefully navigating the growing attraction between them. Victoria had insisted on paying for everything: tickets, lunch, souvenirs, and Daniel had learned to accept her generosity without letting it wound his pride. Mostly. But tonight was different. Tonight, Victoria had invited him to her home. Daniel stood outside the gates of the Stark estate in Bellevue, his 15-year-old Honda looking like a toy car next to the security booth. The guard checked his name against the list, spoke into his radio, and the massive iron gates swung open with silent precision. The driveway alone was longer than Daniel's entire street. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, punctuated by sculptures that probably cost more than his annual salary. The house, mansion, really, rose before him like something from a magazine, all glass and steel and impossible angles that spoke of architects who charged by the square foot. Daniel parked next to a fountain that featured actual marble cherubs and tried to calm his racing heart. This was Victoria's world. This was the life she'd built, the empire Sophie would inherit. And he was a janitor from a 2-bedroom apartment who'd brought his daughter here in clothes from Target. Emma pressed her face against the car window, eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, is this really where Sophie lives?" "Yes, sweetheart. It is. It's like a castle," Emma breathed. "Sophie is so lucky." Lucky. Daniel wondered if Victoria felt lucky, living in this beautiful prison of wealth and responsibility. From their conversations, he was beginning to understand that money solved some problems while creating others entirely. The front door opened before they could knock, and Sophie came running out, her face bright with excitement. "Emma, you're here. Come see my room. It has a slide." The girls disappeared into the house, leaving Daniel standing awkwardly in the foyer that was larger than his entire apartment. Victoria appeared at the top of a curved staircase that belonged in a movie, and Daniel's breath caught. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, but even casual clothes looked different when they cost more than his monthly rent. "You found us," she said, coming down the stairs with a smile that seemed genuinely happy to see him. "Hard to miss," Daniel replied, gesturing at the opulence surrounding them. "This place is incredible, Victoria." Something flickered in her expression, a shadow that passed too quickly to interpret. "Thank you. Would you like a tour?" The next hour was a study in contrasts. Victoria showed him through rooms that could have housed entire families, each one perfectly decorated and somehow soulless. The kitchen was a chef's dream, with appliances that cost more than Daniel's car. The library held more books than some public branches. Sophie's playroom was larger than most people's living rooms, filled with toys that would have made Emma's Christmas list for the next decade. But it was the little details that told the real story. The family photos that showed Victoria and Sophie alone. No extended family, no friends, just the two of them against various exotic backdrops. The home office, where Victoria clearly spent most of her time, with its wall of monitors and conference call equipment. The master bedroom felt more like a hotel suite than a place where someone actually lived. "It's beautiful," Daniel said as they finished the tour, and he meant it. But beautiful in the way museums were beautiful. Impressive, valuable, and somehow untouchable. "But," Victoria asked, reading something in his tone. Daniel hesitated, then decided on honesty. "But it doesn't feel like you. Like the real you." Victoria stopped walking, her hand resting on the banister of the main staircase. "What do you mean?" "The woman I've been getting to know. She's warm, funny, a little chaotic when Sophie's being particularly 8-year-old-ish. This house is perfect, but it's cold, like it was designed to impress people rather than be lived in." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel worried he'd overstepped. But when she spoke, her voice was soft with something that might have been relief. "You're right," she said. "I bought this place 5 years ago because it was what successful people were supposed to want. The best neighborhood, the most impressive architecture, and enough space to entertain business associates. But I've never entertained anyone. Sophie and I rattle around here like two people playing house in a museum." They found the girls in Sophie's room, which despite its size felt more lived in than the rest of the house. Emma was going down the slide for the 10th time, while Sophie cheered her on, and both children were laughing with the pure joy that only kids could achieve. "They're good together," Victoria observed, settling onto Sophie's bed beside Daniel. "They are," he agreed, watching Emma help Sophie rearrange her stuffed animals. Emma's never had a friend like Sophie, someone who just accepts her completely. Sophie's never had a friend like Emma either. Most of the children she meets. Victoria trailed off. "What?" "Their parents want something. A business connection, an investment opportunity, access to my world. The kids pick up on that." They're either intimidated by Sophie's circumstances or they're performing for their parents. Emma just sees Sophie. Daniel nodded, understanding more than Victoria realized. It's hard when people look at your situation instead of seeing your kid. Exactly. Victoria turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his pulse quicken. You do that too, you know. See me instead of my circumstances. Is that unusual? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Daniel, I haven't had a conversation in years where someone wasn't calculating what they could get from me. Business deals, charity donations, social connections. Everyone wants something. But you. She paused, seeming to gather courage. You just want to know me. The moments stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger. Daniel was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how Victoria's perfume mixed with the scent of Sophie's bubble bath to create something uniquely domestic and intimate. Victoria, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. She tensed slightly. What? I looked you up. After that first night, I Googled Stark Industries. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling foolish. I had no idea who you were. The articles, the Forbes lists, the net worth estimates. I almost didn't call you. Why? Because I realized how different our worlds are. Because I understood that you could buy and sell my entire life 1,000 times over and not notice the expense. Because I'm a janitor, Victoria, and you're... Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was it. The moment when reality intruded, when the beautiful bubble they'd been living in finally burst. She'd been waiting for it, dreading it, knowing it was inevitable. And, she asked, her voice carefully neutral, and I realized it doesn't matter. Victoria blinked, certain she'd misheard. What? It doesn't matter, Daniel repeated, turning to face her fully. Your money, your company, your success. None of that changes who you are when you're worried about Sophie, or when you laugh at something Emma says, or when you fall asleep during our phone calls because you've been working 18-hour days. You're still just Victoria, Sophie's mom, the woman who tips waiters too much because she remembers what it's like to worry about money. You remember what it's like? Victoria asked, latching onto the phrase. Daniel nodded. I did some research beyond the business articles. I found interviews from when you first started Stark Industries. You talked about growing up in foster care, about aging out of the system with nothing but determination and a laptop you'd saved for 2 years to buy. You built this empire from nothing, Victoria. You know exactly what it's like to count every dollar. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She'd worked so hard to bury that past, to become someone who belonged in boardrooms and charity galas. But Daniel had seen through the polish to the girl who'd once chosen between textbooks and groceries. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. Was it? Because when you insisted on paying for dinner that first night, it wasn't about showing off your wealth. It was about remembering what it felt like to sit in a restaurant and worry about the check. You saw me struggling, and you wanted to help because you've been there. The tears came then, silent and unexpected. Victoria hadn't cried in years. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford, a sign of weakness in a world that was always watching for cracks in her armor. Hey, Daniel said softly, reaching out to touch her hand. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't upset me, Victoria managed. You saw me, the real me. I'd forgotten she still existed. From across the room, Sophie's voice cut through the moment. Mommy, why are you crying? Are you sad? Victoria quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. No, sweetheart. I'm not sad. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy too. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a child trying to understand adult emotions. Are you happy because Daniel is here? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that made both adults freeze. But before either could respond, Emma chimed in with the devastating honesty of a 9-year-old. My daddy's happy when he talks about you, she announced matter-of-factly. He smiles differently now, like when he looks at pictures of my mommy from before she got sick. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emma had never mentioned her mother's illness before, had never connected Victoria to those old memories. But children saw patterns adults missed, connections that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. Emma, Daniel said gently, what do you mean? Before Mommy got sad and left, she used to make you smile like that. Like you were keeping a happy secret. Victoria makes you smile the same way. Victoria felt her world tilt. She'd assumed Daniel's ex-wife had simply left and had chosen to abandon her family. But Emma's words painted a different picture, one of illness, of sadness, of a woman who'd left not from lack of love, but from something darker. "Daniel," Victoria said quietly, "you don't have to." She had postpartum depression, Daniel said, his voice steady, but his eyes distant. After Emma was born, she just disappeared inside herself. I tried to help, tried to get her treatment, but she was convinced Emma would be better off without her. One day I came home from work and found a note. She said she was poisoned, that she was going to destroy Emma the way she destroyed everything else she touched. The room was silent except for the sound of the girls playing, oblivious to the adult pain being shared above their heads. "I haven't heard from her since," Daniel continued. "No calls, no letters, no attempts to see Emma. It's like she erased us from her life completely." Victoria felt her heart break for this man who'd been carrying such pain, for Emma who'd grown up believing her mother simply didn't love her enough to stay. "I'm so sorry," Victoria whispered. "The point is," Daniel said, looking at her with eyes that held too much understanding, "I know what it's like to love someone who's drowning, to watch them disappear even when they're standing right in front of you. And I know what it's like to be left behind to pick up the pieces." Victoria understood what he was really saying, that he saw her struggles, her loneliness, her tendency to disappear into work when emotions became too overwhelming, that he recognized the signs of someone who was drowning in their own success. "I'm not drowning," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. "Aren't you?" Daniel asked gently. "When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? When's the last time you turned off your phone for an entire evening? When's the last time you felt like Victoria instead of Victoria Stark, CEO?" The questions hit like arrows, each one finding its mark. Victoria realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly present in her own life, truly connected to anything beyond quarterly reports and board meetings. "I don't know how to be anyone else anymore," she admitted. "Yes, you do," Daniel said firmly. "You're her right now. You're Victoria who worries about Sophie's happiness, who cries during phone calls when you think about how fast she's growing up, who bought a house with a slide because your daughter asked for one. You're Victoria who sees a struggling single dad and wants to help not because it's good PR, but because you remember what struggling feels like." Victoria looked at him through her tears, this man who somehow saw past every wall she'd built, every mask she wore. In her world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances, Daniel's genuine care felt revolutionary. "What are we doing, Daniel?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to stop." From across the room, Sophie's voice interrupted again. "Are you going to kiss now?" In movies, when people cry and talk about feelings, they always kiss. Both adults laughed despite themselves, the tension breaking like a fever. "Sophie Stark," Victoria said, "you watch too many movies." "And you don't watch enough," Sophie replied with 8-year-old wisdom. "Emma, don't you think they should kiss?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think they should be happy. And they look happy when they look at each other." Victoria and Daniel's eyes met, and in that moment, the pretense fell away completely. The billionaire and the janitor, the CEO and the night shift worker, the woman who had everything and the man who had nothing, none of that mattered. What mattered was the recognition in each other's eyes, the understanding that they'd found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. "The girls are right," Daniel said softly. "You do make me happy. You make me feel real," Victoria replied. "Like I exist outside of my net worth and my company stock price." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. But it was also full of the weight of their different worlds, the challenges that lay ahead, the obstacles that money couldn't solve and love might not be enough to overcome. Neither of them knew that their happiness was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, that forces beyond their control were already moving to tear apart what they'd begun to build. But for now, in Sophie's bedroom with their daughters playing nearby, they had this moment of perfect understanding. And sometimes, that was enough to build a future on. "My heart is absolutely melting. Can you feel how real their connection is becoming? But something tells me their different worlds are about to collide in a big way. What do you think is going to challenge them next? Let me know in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take some unexpected turns. The photograph appeared on the front page of the Seattle Business Journal 3 days later, and it changed everything. Daniel was grabbing coffee before his shift when he saw it. A candid shot of him and Victoria at Pike Place Market the previous weekend, Emma and Sophie between them, all four of them laughing at something Sophie had said. The headline read, Stark Industries CEO's Secret Romance. Billionaire Victoria Stark spotted with mystery man and children. His hands shook as he read the article, each word feeling like a nail in the coffin of the fragile happiness they'd been building. Sources close to Stark Industries report that CEO Victoria Stark, worth an estimated $3.2 billion, has been seen repeatedly with an unidentified man and his daughter. The mystery man appears to be significantly older and of modest means, leading to speculation about the nature of their relationship. Board members have expressed concern about Stark's judgment, particularly given the company's upcoming merger with Japanese tech giant Yamamoto Industries, worth $15 billion. Daniel's phone rang before he finished reading. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, and he could hear the strain in her voice before she even spoke. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I don't know how they got that photo. I'm handling it, but... Victoria, slow down. What's happening? The board called an emergency meeting. They're questioning my judgment. The Yamamoto deal is worth $15 billion, and they think my personal life is a distraction. They're talking about a vote of no confidence. Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Because of me. Because of narrow-minded people who think they have the right to dictate my personal life, Victoria said fiercely, but he could hear the fear underneath her anger. What does that mean? For us. The silence stretched too long. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was small, defeated. I don't know. That evening, Daniel sat in his apartment staring at his phone, waiting for Victoria to call back. She'd promised to call after a board meeting, but hours had passed with no word. Emma was at Mrs. Chen's for the night, giving him space to process the chaos his life had become. When a knock came at his door, he expected Mrs. Chen to return Emma early. Instead, he found a man in an expensive suit holding a briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Mr. Cruz? My name is Richard Blackwood. I represent certain interests related to Stark Industries. May I come in? Every instinct Daniel possessed screamed danger, but curiosity won. He stepped aside, and Blackwood entered his modest apartment with the careful attention of someone cataloging evidence. Nice place, Blackwood said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Cozy. What do you want? Daniel asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Blackwood set his briefcase on Daniel's kitchen table and opened it with theatrical precision. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Daniel and Victoria at the restaurant, at the Seattle Center, at Pike Place Market. Emma and Sophie playing together. Victoria paying for meals, buying gifts, the obvious disparity in their circumstances captured in painful detail. You've been busy, Blackwood observed. 3 weeks of documented contact with Victoria Stark. Quite the whirlwind romance. Who are you? Daniel demanded. I represent a consortium of Stark Industries board members who are concerned about Ms. Stark's recent distractions. The Yamamoto merger is crucial to the company's future, and certain parties feel that Ms. Stark's judgment may be compromised. Blackwood pulled out a tablet and showed Daniel a series of financial documents. Stark Industries stock has dropped 12% since news of your relationship broke. The Yamamoto executives are traditional, conservative. They don't approve of their potential business partners. Unconventional choices. Daniel stared at the numbers, each percentage point representing millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, the livelihoods of people he'd never met, but whose futures apparently hung in the balance of his relationship with Victoria. What do you want from me? Daniel asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. Blackwood smiled that cold, calculating smile again. We want you to disappear. He pulled out a check and placed it on the table. Daniel's eyes widened at the amount. More money than he'd make in 5 years, enough to pay off every debt, to give Emma everything she'd ever wanted, to never worry about bills again. $500,000, Blackwood said casually. All you have to do is end your relationship with Ms. Stark and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Move away, start fresh somewhere else. Give your daughter the life she deserves. Daniel stared at the check, his mind reeling. $500,000. Emma's college fund, secured. A house with a yard where she could play. Private schools, music lessons, everything he'd ever dreamed of giving her but never could afford. And if I don't, he asked. Blackwood's expression hardened. Then we'll be forced to take more aggressive measures. You see, Mr. Cruz, we've done our research. Your ex-wife, Sarah, she's been in and out of psychiatric facilities for the past 3 years. Currently residing at Peaceful Meadows in Oregon, I believe. Daniel's blood turned to ice. How do you? We know everything, Mr. Cruz, including the fact that she's been asking about Emma lately, expressing interest in reconnecting with her daughter. It would be unfortunate if someone were to inform her about your current address, your work schedule, Emma's school. The threat hung in the air like poison. Daniel felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. You stay away from my daughter. That's entirely up to you, Blackwood said smoothly. Take the money, disappear, and your family remains safe and secure. Continue this relationship with Ms. Stark, and we can't guarantee you what might happen. Custody battles can be so messy, especially when one parent has unlimited resources and the other. Well, Daniel's hands clenched in a fist. Get out. Think about it, Mr. Cruz. $500,000. Your daughter's future. Ms. Stark's company. Everyone wins if you just walk away. After Blackwood left, Daniel sat in his kitchen staring at the check until the numbers blurred together. $500,000. Emma's entire future, laid out in neat rows of zeros. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Board meeting was brutal. Can we talk tomorrow? I miss you. Daniel stared at the message, then at the check, then at the photo of Emma on his refrigerator. Her gap-toothed smile, her trusting eyes, her complete faith that Daddy would always protect her. The next morning brought worse news. Daniel arrived at work to find his supervisor waiting with a grim expression. Danny, I'm sorry. I have to let you go. What? What? The hospital administration got some calls. Apparently, you've been in the news, and it's reflecting poorly on the hospital's image. They want you gone by the end of the week. Daniel felt the walls closing in. No job, no income, and now Blackwood's threats echoing in his mind. He thought about calling Victoria, but what could he tell her? That her board was threatening his family? That loving her might cost Emma everything? That evening, Emma noticed his distraction immediately. Daddy, are you sad again? Like you were before Victoria? Daniel knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held too much wisdom for a 9-year-old. What would you say if we had to move away? Start over somewhere new? Emma's face fell. But what about Sophie? And Victoria? I thought we were going to be a family. A family. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. When had Emma started thinking of Victoria and Sophie as family? When had this stopped being about him and become about all 4 of them? Sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to, sweetheart. But why? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Don't you love Victoria? Doesn't she love you? Daniel pulled his daughter into his arms, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on his shoulders. Sometimes love isn't enough, he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was fighting her own battle. The board meeting had been a massacre, with member after member questioning her judgment, her priorities, her fitness to lead the company she'd built from nothing. The Yamamoto executives are reconsidering the merger. Board member Harrison Webb had announced with barely concealed satisfaction. They're concerned about the stability of our leadership. My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company. Victoria had shot back. Doesn't it? Webb had replied. You've been distracted, unavailable, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. This man, this janitor, he's clearly after your money. Can't you see that? But Victoria could see Daniel's face when he talked about Emma, the way he tried to pay for dinner that first night, how he'd never once asked her for anything. If Daniel was after her money, he was the worst gold digger in history. Now, sitting in her empty mansion with Sophie asleep upstairs, Victoria stared at the merger documents that represented everything she'd worked for. $15 billion. Thousands of jobs. The future of the company that was her life's work. All of it hanging in the balance, because she'd fallen in love with a man whose only crime was being born into a different world. Her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and her heart leaped with hope. Daniel, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. Victoria, we need to talk. Something in his tone made her stomach drop. What's wrong? I can't do this anymore. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean? Us. It's not working. Our worlds are too different. I can't give you what you need, and you can't give me what I need. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. Daniel, what are you talking about? Yesterday you said. Yesterday, I was living in a fantasy. Today I'm facing reality. This was a mistake, Victoria. All of it. You don't mean that. I do. Daniel's voice was steady, but Victoria could hear something underneath. Pain, maybe, or fear. I'm taking Emma and moving away. Starting fresh somewhere else. What about Sophie? She loves Emma. She loves you. Sophie will be fine. She's resilient, and she'll have everything she needs. The best schools, the best opportunities, everything money can buy. The words were like knives, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. Victoria recognized the technique. She'd used it herself in business, saying the cruelest possible thing to end negotiations quickly and cleanly. Daniel, please. Let's talk about this in person. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. There's nothing to fix, Victoria. This is just how it is. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. Upstairs, she could hear Sophie stirring, probably waking from a bad dream. Soon her daughter would come padding downstairs looking for comfort, and Victoria would have to explain why Daniel and Emma weren't coming back. She thought about the merger documents on her desk, the board members who'd smiled with satisfaction when they delivered their ultimatum, the future that stretched ahead of her, successful, profitable, and utterly alone. For the first time in years, Victoria Stark, billionaire CEO, put her head in her hands and sobbed. Neither she nor Daniel knew that their darkest hour was just beginning, that the forces working against them were more powerful and more ruthless than either had imagined. That sometimes, when you're fighting for love, the enemy isn't poverty or wealth or social expectations. Sometimes the enemy is the voice in your own head telling you that you don't deserve happiness. But in the darkness, hope was already stirring. Because love, real love, doesn't die easily. And sometimes the people who love you most are willing to fight battles you don't even know you're facing. The darkest hour was upon them, but dawn was coming. I'm literally crying right now. Can you feel how much pain they're both in? But something tells me this isn't over. Not by a long shot. What do you think is going to bring them back together? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're as invested in Daniel and Victoria's love story as I am, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the next part is going to be everything. Sophie Stark had always been precocious, but heartbreak made her dangerous. For 3 days after Daniel's phone call, she watched her mother move through their mansion like a ghost, answering emails with mechanical precision, attending video conferences with a smile that never reached her eyes, pretending that everything was fine when everything was clearly falling apart. On the 4th day, Sophie decided she'd had enough. I'm going to find Daniel, she announced over breakfast, her 8-year-old voice carrying the kind of determination that had built empires. Victoria looked up from her untouched coffee, startled. Sweetheart, we talked about this. Daniel and Emma had to move away. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions That's stupid, Sophie interrupted, a word that would normally have earned her a lecture about appropriate language. Daniel loves you. I saw it in his eyes. And you love him. So why aren't you fighting for him? Victoria felt tears threaten again. How could she explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes love wasn't enough? That the adult world was full of complications and compromises that children couldn't understand? It's not that simple, Sophie. Yes, it is, Sophie said with the absolute certainty of childhood. When something is broken, you fix it. When someone you love is sad, you help them. When bad people try to keep good people apart, you fight back. Bad people. Victoria's executive instincts, dulled by grief, suddenly sharpened. What do you mean, bad people? Sophie pulled out her tablet, the child-safe one Victoria had given her for educational games, and showed her mother a video she'd recorded from her bedroom window 3 nights ago. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., well past Sophie's bedtime, but there on the screen was a clear image of Richard Blackwood leaving their property. I couldn't sleep, so I was looking at the stars, Sophie explained matter-of-factly. And I saw this man leaving our house. But you didn't have any meetings that night. You were crying in your office. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Sophie, Did you see this man come inside? No, but he was here for a long time. And he looked mean, like the bad guys in movies who try to steal people's happiness. Victoria's mind raced. Blackwood had been to her house without her knowledge, which meant he'd somehow bypassed her security system. But more importantly, his visit had coincided perfectly with Daniel's sudden change of heart. Sophie, I need you to stay with Mrs. Patterson today. Mommy has some very important business to take care of. Are you going to fight for Daniel? Sophie asked hopefully. Victoria kissed her daughter's forehead, feeling something fierce and protective awakening in her chest. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy's going to fight. An hour later, Victoria stormed into the Stark Industries boardroom, where the emergency session was already in progress. The 12 board members looked up in surprise as she entered without knocking, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their chairs. We need to discuss the Yamamoto situation, Harrison Webb began, but Victoria cut him off. We need to discuss Richard Blackwood. The silence that followed was deafening. Webb's face went pale, and Victoria knew she'd hit her target. I don't know what you're talking about, Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Because I have security footage of him leaving my property 3 nights ago. The same night Daniel Cruz suddenly decided to end our relationship. Victoria's voice was deadly calm, the tone she used when she was about to destroy a competitor. Would you like to explain how a man I've never met gained access to my private residence? Webb glanced around the table, looking for support, but the other board members were suddenly very interested in their papers. Corporate espionage was one thing. Breaking and entering was quite another. Victoria, you have to understand, Webb said desperately. The Yamamoto deal is worth $15 billion, yes. You've mentioned that. What you haven't mentioned is that you've been planning to oust me as CEO regardless of the merger. This was just a convenient excuse. Victoria had done her homework during the sleepless hours since Daniel's call. Webb had been building a coalition for months, quietly promising board positions and lucrative contracts to anyone who would support his bid for control. The Yamamoto merger was just the weapon he'd been waiting for. The company needs stable leadership, Webb said, his mask finally slipping. You're too emotional, too distracted. This infatuation with some janitor proves that. That janitor is a better man than you'll ever be, Victoria said quietly. But this isn't about Daniel. This is about you trying to steal the company I built from nothing. She pulled out her phone and played a recording that made Webb's face go ashen. His voice filled the room, clear and damning. Get rid of the boyfriend, and Stark becomes vulnerable. Emotional, easy to manipulate. The board will have no choice but to remove her. Corporate espionage, conspiracy, and now blackmail, Victoria said conversationally. I believe that's enough to have you arrested, Harrison. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to resign quietly and disappear. Webb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't prove anything. Can I? Victoria smiled, and it was the smile that had made her billions. Sharp, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. I've been recording board meetings for years, Harrison. Insurance policy. And I have very good lawyers. As Webb stormed out, followed by 2 other board members who'd been part of his conspiracy, Victoria turned to the remaining members. Now, she said, settling into her chair at the head of the table, let's discuss the real future of this company, starting with a new policy about board members who think they can manipulate my personal life. But even as Victoria reclaimed control of her boardroom, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Because somewhere across town, Daniel was packing his life into boxes, preparing to disappear with Emma before anyone could hurt the people he loved most. Meanwhile, Daniel was discovering that 9-year-olds could be just as determined as 8-year-olds when their happiness was at stake. I'm not going, Emma announced from her bedroom doorway, arms crossed in a pose that reminded Daniel painfully of Victoria when she was being stubborn. And we talked about this. We're starting fresh, remember? New city, new adventures. I don't want new adventures. I want Sophie and Victoria. I want our family. Our family. There was again that phrase that cut through Daniel's defenses like a knife. Sometimes we can't have what we want, sweetheart. That's what sad grown-ups say when they're too scared to fight for what makes them happy, Emma said with devastating accuracy. Victoria taught me that. She said her company tried to tell her she couldn't be successful because she was a girl but she fought anyway. She said fighting for what you love is the most important thing you can do. Daniel knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that held too much wisdom for someone so young. It's complicated. There are people who don't want Victoria and me to be together. Bad people. Powerful people. Emma considered this seriously. Victoria is powerful too. And you're strong. And Sophie and I are smart. That's 4 against however many bad people there are. We can win. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Mrs. Chin's number flashed on the screen, and he answered with growing concern. Daniel, dear, there's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Victoria Stark. She seems very upset. Daniel's heart stopped. She's there? At your apartment? Yes. And she has Sophie with her. They're both crying, Daniel. What's going on? Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the careful walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. Tell her I'll be right there. He found Victoria sitting on Mrs. Chen's couch, Sophie curled up beside her, both of them looking like they'd been through a war. Victoria's usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her designer clothes wrinkled. She looked human in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. You came, he said quietly. Victoria looked up, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. I know what they did to you. Blackwood, the threats, the money. I know all of it. Daniel felt the last of his defenses crumble. Victoria. No, let me finish. She stood, and even disheveled and heartbroken, she commanded the room. I fired Harrison Webb and 2 other board members. I've restructured the company to prevent any future coups. And I've hired the best security firm in the country to make sure no one ever threatens you or Emma again. That's not the point, Daniel said desperately. Don't you see? This will never end. There will always be someone who thinks I'm not good enough for you. Someone who wants to use me to hurt you. I can't live like that. And I won't put Emma through it. Then don't. Daniel blinked. What? Victoria took a step closer, and he could see the determination burning in her eyes. The same fire that had built an empire from nothing. Don't live like that. Live like this instead. She gestured to Sophie and Emma, who were now holding hands and watching the adults with hopeful expressions. Live like someone who deserves love. Live like someone who's worth fighting for. Because you are, Daniel. You're worth everything. Victoria, I'm a janitor. You're a billionaire. That doesn't just go away. You're right, Victoria said, surprising him. It doesn't. I'll always have more money than you. I'll always move in circles you find uncomfortable. There will always be people who judge us, who think they know what's best for both of us. Daniel felt his heart sinking, but Victoria wasn't finished. But here's what else doesn't go away, she continued, her voice growing stronger. The way you make me laugh. The way Sophie lights up when she sees you. The way Emma looks at me like I'm someone worth knowing. The way you see me, really see me, not my bank account or my company, but me. That doesn't go away either. She reached in her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Do you know what this is? Daniel shook his head. It's my resignation letter. I wrote it this morning, before I found out about Blackwood's threats. I was going to step down as CEO, liquidate my assets, and start over, because I thought that was the only way we could be together. Daniel stared at her in shock. Victoria, you can't. I can't what? Give up everything for love. Isn't that exactly what you were planning to do? She smiled through her tears. The difference is, I don't have to, because I realized something today. I don't need to choose between my success and my happiness. I just need to choose better people to share both with. She took his hands in hers, and Daniel felt the last of his resistance crumble. I love you, Daniel Cruz. I love your strength, your kindness, your devotion to Emma. I love the way you make me want to be better, not just more successful. And I'm not giving that up because some small-minded people think they know what's best for me. What about the merger? Your company. The Yamamoto executives called this morning. Apparently, they were impressed by how I handled the board situation. They said it showed strong leadership and decisive action. The merger is back on track. Daniel felt hope stirring in his chest, dangerous and beautiful. And if it wasn't, Victoria's smile was radiant. Then I build something new. With you. Because that's what people do when they love each other. They build something together. From the couch, Sophie's voice cut through the moment with perfect timing. Are you going to kiss now? Because Emma and I have been waiting forever, and we're getting really bored. Both adults laughed despite their tears, and Daniel realized that this This moment of joy in the middle of chaos was what he'd been fighting for all along. Not perfection, not a life without problems, but a life where love was stronger than fear. Yes, he said, looking into Victoria's eyes. I think we are. And as he kissed the woman who turned his world upside down in the best possible way, Daniel heard Emma and Sophie cheering in the background, and he knew that sometimes the most important battles were won not with money or power, but with the simple decision to stop running and start fighting for what mattered most. The turning point had arrived. Love had found its courage, and the real story was just beginning. Yes, finally, I'm literally cheering over here. Can you feel how powerful love is when people stop being afraid and start fighting for each other? But we're not done yet. I have a feeling the best is still to come. What do you think happens next? Drop your predictions in the comments and smash that subscribe button, because this finale is going to be absolutely perfect. 6 months later, the Stark Industries annual gala was in full swing, but this year's event was unlike any in the company's history. Instead of the usual sterile hotel ballroom, Victoria had chosen the Seattle Children's Museum, a venue that raised eyebrows among the city's elite, but perfectly captured the spirit of the woman who transformed from untouchable CEO to someone who understood that the most important investments were in people, not portfolios. Daniel adjusted his tie for the 10th time, still not quite believing he belonged at an event where champagne cost more per bottle than his old weekly salary. But Emma's hand in his and Victoria's radiant smile across the room reminded him that belonging wasn't about money. It was about love, and he had more of that than he'd ever dreamed possible. "Daddy, you look handsome," Emma whispered, straightening his boutonniere with the careful attention she'd learned from watching Victoria prepare for business meetings. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look beautiful, too." Emma beamed, twirling in the dress Victoria had helped her pick out. Not the most expensive option, but the one that made Emma feel like a princess. It was one of the 1,000 small ways Victoria had shown that she understood what mattered. Not the price tag, but the joy. Across the room, Victoria was in her element, moving between donors and board members with the grace of someone who'd been born to command attention. But every few minutes, her eyes would find Daniel's, and her professional smile would transform into something real and warm and just for him. "She's really something, isn't she?" Daniel turned to find Harrison Webb standing beside him, looking older and somehow smaller than he had 6 months ago. The former board member's presence at the gala was unexpected, to say the least. "What are you doing here, Webb?" Daniel asked, instinctively stepping closer to Emma. "Victoria invited me," Webb said, and there was something like shame in his voice. "Surprised me too, after everything I did." Daniel studied the man who'd nearly destroyed his happiness, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But Webb just looked tired, defeated in a way that went beyond professional failure. "She said everyone deserves a chance at redemption," Webb continued. "Even people who make terrible choices out of fear and greed. She offered me a position at the foundation she's starting, nothing glamorous, just helping coordinate charity work. Said she thought I might understand what it's like to lose everything and need a second chance." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. This was so perfectly Victoria, seeing potential for good even in people who'd hurt her, believing in redemption when others would choose revenge. "Are you going to take it?" Daniel asked. Webb nodded slowly. "I think I am. Turns out being unemployed and universally despised gives you a lot of time to think about the kind of person you want to be." Before Daniel could respond, the lights dimmed and Victoria took the stage. She looked stunning in a midnight blue dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and approachable. Her hair swept up to reveal the simple diamond earrings Daniel had given her for her birthday. Not the most expensive jewelry she owned, but the most meaningful. "Good evening, everyone," Victoria began, her voice carrying easily through the museum's main hall. "Thank you for joining us tonight for what I hope will be the first of many celebrations of what we can accomplish when we remember that business isn't just about profit. It's about people." The crowd applauded politely, but Daniel could see some confused glances. This wasn't the usual corporate speak they were accustomed to from Victoria Stark. 6 months ago, I thought success meant having the biggest company, the most impressive quarterly reports, the most intimidating boardroom presence. I measure my worth in stock prices and market share, and I was very good at that game. Victoria's eyes found Daniel's in the crowd, and her smile softened. But then I met someone who taught me that real success isn't about what you accumulate. It's about what you give. Not just money, though that's important too, but time, attention, love, presence. The things that actually matter. She gestured to a large screen behind her, which lit up with images of the past 6 months. The new employee childcare center at Stark Industries. The scholarship program for single parents. The partnership with local schools to provide technology education. The community garden project that had transformed an abandoned lot into a space where families could grow food together. These initiatives represent a new direction for Stark Industries. Victoria continued. We're not just building technology anymore. We're building community. We're not just creating products. We're creating opportunities. And we're not just making money. We're making a difference. The applause was warmer now, more genuine. Daniel could see board members nodding approvingly, donors leaning forward with interest. Victoria had done what she did best. She'd taken a vision and made it irresistible. But the most important thing I've learned, Victoria said, her voice growing more personal, is that none of this matters if you don't have people to share it with. Success without love is just expensive loneliness. She paused, and Daniel felt his heart begin to race as she looked directly at him. Daniel Cruz, would you join me up here, please? The crowd turned to look at him, and Daniel felt every eye in the room cataloging his appearance, his obvious discomfort, his clear status as an outsider in this world of wealth and power. But Emma squeezed his hand and whispered, "Go get her, Daddy." And suddenly none of that mattered. Daniel made his way through the crowd, acutely aware of the whispers and stares, but focused entirely on Victoria's face. When he reached the stage, she took his hand, and the simple contact steadied him. 6 months ago, Victoria said to the crowd, "This man changed my life. Not because he wanted something from me, but because he saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. He reminded me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely." She turned to face Daniel fully, and he could see tears gathering in her eyes. "Daniel, you've taught me what it means to be truly wealthy. Not in money, but in love, in family, in the kind of happiness that comes from building something beautiful with someone who sees your heart instead of your bank account." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, and Daniel's world tilted on its axis. "I know this isn't traditional," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know women aren't supposed to propose, and billionaires aren't supposed to fall in love with janitors, and fairy tales aren't supposed to happen in real life. But I've never been very good at following other people's rules." The crowd had gone completely silent, the only sound Daniel's thundering heartbeat and the soft gasp Emma made from somewhere in the audience. "Daniel Cruz," Victoria said, dropping to one knee in front of 500 of Seattle's most powerful people, "will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, not the largest diamond in the room, but exactly right for them. Simple, elegant, meaningful rather than ostentatious. Daniel stared at it, then at Victoria's face, then at the crowd of people watching their most private moment become public spectacle. And then he started laughing. Not nervous laughter or uncomfortable laughter, but pure, joyful laughter that came from the absolute absurdity and perfect rightness of the moment. Here was Victoria Stark, worth billions of dollars, proposing to him in front of everyone who'd ever doubted they belonged together. "Yes," he said, pulling her to her feet and kissing her as the crowd erupted in applause. "Yes, of course, yes." As Victoria slipped the ring onto his finger, Daniel heard Emma's voice cutting through the noise. "Sophie, they're getting married. We're going to be sisters." And there was Sophie, pushing through the crowd with the determination of a girl who'd orchestrated this entire romance from the beginning, launching herself at both of them with a hug that nearly knocked them over. "I knew it," Sophie declared triumphantly. "I knew you were supposed to be together. Emma, we're going to plan the best wedding ever." The crowd was on its feet now, applauding not just the engagement, but the beautiful chaos of two families becoming one. Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, some genuinely happy, others calculating the social implications, a few clearly disapproving, and realized he didn't care about any of it. What mattered was Victoria's hand in his, Emma and Sophie jumping up and down with excitement, and the knowledge that love had won. Not easily, not without cost, but completely and absolutely. Later, As the evening wound down and the last guests filtered out, Daniel found himself alone with Victoria on the museum's rooftop terrace, the Seattle skyline glittering below them like scattered diamonds. "So," he said, still turning the ring on his finger, "Mrs. Cruz." Victoria laughed. "Actually, I was thinking Victoria Stark Cruz. Or maybe Cruz Stark. We should probably discuss the logistics." "We should probably discuss a lot of things," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "Like where we're going to live, and how to blend our families, and whether I'm going to have to learn to play golf with your business associates." "Definitely not golf," Victoria said firmly. "But maybe we could teach them about community gardens and school fundraisers, and what really matters." Daniel kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with the Seattle night air. "I love you, Victoria Stark. All of you. The CEO, the mother, the woman who sees magic in everyday moments. I love you too, Daniel Cruz. My anchor, my heart, my reminder that the best investments are always in love." From inside the museum, they could hear Emma and Sophie planning their future with the boundless optimism of children who believed in happy endings. And for the first time in his life, Daniel believed in them too. The climax had arrived not with drama or conflict, but with the simple recognition that love, when it's real and fought for and chosen every day, really could conquer all. Even the distance between a billionaire's mansion and a janitor's apartment. Even the voices that said they didn't belong together. Even the fear that happiness was too good to be true. Because sometimes, when you're brave enough to fight for love, it fights back for you. I'm literally sobbing happy tears. Can you believe Victoria proposed? That was the most beautiful, powerful moment ever. But wait, we still have the conclusion coming, and I have a feeling it's going to be absolutely perfect. What do you think their wedding will be like? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story has touched your heart like it's touched mine, make sure you're subscribed because the ending is going to be everything we've been hoping for. 1 year later, the wedding was nothing like what Seattle society expected from Victoria Stark, and everything like what Daniel and Victoria had dreamed of together. Instead of the grand cathedral or exclusive country club that would have been traditional for someone of Victoria's status, they chose the community garden they'd helped create. The same abandoned lot that had been transformed into a thriving space where families grew vegetables and children learned about nurturing life from the ground up. Emma and Sophie had insisted on being co-maids of honor, a decision that resulted in matching lavender dresses and a level of wedding planning intensity that would have impressed Fortune 500 executives. They'd spent months creating handmade invitations, planning a menu that included both gourmet catering and Daniel's famous grilled cheese sandwiches, and designing centerpieces made from vegetables grown in the very garden where their parents would exchange vows. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked Daniel as he adjusted his tie in the small greenhouse that served as the groom's preparation area. "Terrified," Daniel admitted with a smile. "But the good kind of terrified, like when you're about to go on the best roller coaster in the world." "Victoria's nervous too," Sophie announced, appearing in the doorway with the confidence of someone who'd been monitoring both sides of the wedding preparations. "She keeps checking her makeup and asking if her dress is too much." Daniel laughed. Victoria's dress was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but practical enough for an outdoor wedding in a garden. She'd chosen it not because it was the most expensive option, but because it was the one that made her feel most like herself. "Tell her she looks perfect," Daniel said. "Tell her I can't wait to marry her." "Tell her yourself," Sophie said with 8-year-old wisdom. "She's right outside." And there she was, standing among the tomato plants and sunflowers, looking radiant in a way that had nothing to do with her dress or makeup and everything to do with the joy radiating from her face. When she saw Daniel, her smile could have powered the entire city. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," Victoria said, but she was walking toward him anyway. "Since when do we follow traditional rules?" Daniel replied, meeting her halfway among the raised garden beds. "Good point." Victoria reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past year. "How are you feeling?" "Like the luckiest man alive," Daniel said honestly. "You?" "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the vegetables they planted together, the flowers Emma and Sophie had chosen, the tangible proof of what they'd built from nothing but love and determination. "Mrs. Chun is crying already," Victoria observed, nodding toward the elderly woman who'd become like a grandmother to both girls. She's been crying since we announced the engagement, Daniel laughed. I think she's just happy we figured it out. We had good teachers, Victoria said, glancing at Emma and Sophie, who were now directing the placement of chairs with the authority of seasoned event planners. The ceremony itself was perfect in its imperfection. Daniel's voice cracked when he promised to love Victoria, in board meetings and bedtime stories, in success and struggle, in designer gowns and gardening clothes. Victoria laughed through her tears when she vowed to choose love over fear, family over fortune, and Daniel over anyone who thinks billionaires can't marry janitors and live happily ever after. Emma and Sophie presented the rings with the solemnity of children who understood they were witnessing something magical. The officiant, a friend of Victoria's who'd known her since her foster care days, spoke about love that transforms not just individuals, but entire communities. And when Daniel and Victoria kissed as husband and wife, the cheer that went up from their guests, a mix of tech executives and hospital workers, board members and teachers, billionaires and single parents, sounded like hope itself. The reception was held right there in the garden, with string lights hung between the fruit trees and tables made from reclaimed wood. Victoria's former board members sat next to Daniel's co-workers from the hospital, sharing stories and discovering that they had more in common than anyone had expected. Harrison Webb, now director of the Stark Foundation's Community Outreach Program, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 6 months ago, I thought success meant crushing your competition and accumulating power. Victoria and Daniel taught me that real success means lifting others up and sharing what you have. They've shown all of us that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your world. It's about building a new world together. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself watching the scene with wonder. Emma was teaching some of Victoria's business associates how to identify different types of herbs. Sophie was explaining her theory about vegetable consciousness to a group of fascinated tech entrepreneurs. Victoria was deep in conversation with Mrs. Chan about starting a cooking program for the community center. This was their life now. Messy, complicated, beautiful, and real. Penny for your thoughts. Victoria appeared beside him, having changed from her wedding dress into a simple sundress that was much more practical for dancing in a garden. Just thinking about how far we've come, Daniel said, pulling her in his arms as the band, of a local group that played everything from classical to country, started a slow song. Any regrets? Victoria asked as they swayed together under the stars. Daniel looked around at their guests, at Emma and Sophie, now fast asleep on a blanket under the apple tree, at the life they'd built from nothing but courage and love. Only one, he said seriously. Victoria's face fell slightly. What? I regret that it took us so long to find each other. Victoria's smile was radiant. Well, we found each other eventually, and we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. Speaking of which, Daniel said, I have something for you. He pulled out a small wrapped package, and Victoria looked at him in surprise. Daniel, we said no gifts. The wedding was a gift enough. This isn't a wedding gift, Daniel said. It's a life gift. Victoria unwrapped the package to find a simple photo frame containing a picture of the four of them from their first official family outing, all of them covered in flour from a disastrous attempt at making pancakes together, laughing so hard they could barely stand up. It's perfect, Victoria whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. Read the back, Daniel said. Victoria turned the frame over to find an inscription in Daniel's careful handwriting. To Victoria, who taught me that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're moments like this, with people like you. Love always, Daniel. P.S. Sophie says we need to have this conversation about getting a dog. Victoria burst out laughing. She's been lobbying for months. I know. I think we're going to lose this battle. Good, Victoria said, kissing him softly. I like losing battles to our daughters. Our daughters. The phrase still gave Daniel chills of happiness. Emma and Sophie had adapted to their blended family with the resilience of children who'd found what they'd been looking for all along. Not just new family members, but the security of being completely loved and accepted. They'd moved into a new house together. Not Victoria's mansion, which they'd sold to fund the expansion of the community garden project, and not Daniel's tiny apartment, but something in between. A real home with a yard where the girls could play, a kitchen big enough for family dinners, and an office where Victoria could work without disappearing entirely from their lives. Daniel had gone back to school, using his experience at the hospital and Victoria's encouragement to pursue a degree in healthcare administration. Victoria had restructured Stark Industries to focus on sustainable technology and community development, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. But the real transformation was in the small moments. Saturday morning pancakes that actually turned out edible, family game nights that ended in tickle fights, bedtime stories where Emma and Sophie took turns reading to the adults, quiet conversations after the girls were asleep, where Daniel and Victoria planned their future together. "What are you thinking about now?" Victoria asked, noticing his distant expression. "Just all of it. This time last year, I was a single dad working nights and worrying about every bill. You were a lonely billionaire who'd forgotten how to be happy. And now we're a family," Victoria finished. "A real, messy, beautiful family. The best kind," Daniel agreed. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Emma and Sophie woke up long enough to demand one more dance with their parents. The four of them swayed together under the string lights, surrounded by the garden they'd grown together, the community they'd built, the love they'd chosen every day. "Are we going to live happily ever after now?" Sophie asked sleepily. "We're going to live," Victoria said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Happily, sadly, angrily, joyfully. We're going to live all of it together." "That sounds perfect," Emma murmured against Daniel's shoulder. And it was perfect, Daniel thought. Not because their life would be without challenges or conflicts or moments of doubt, but because they'd learned that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about choosing someone to grow with, to build with, to face whatever came next with. As they walked home together, Daniel carrying a sleeping Emma, Victoria carrying Sophie, both girls' flower crowns slightly askew, Daniel realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not a destination you arrived at, but a choice you made every day. The choice to see abundance instead of scarcity. To choose love over fear. To believe that sometimes, when you're brave enough to open your heart, the universe conspires to give you exactly what you need. A single dad had walked into a restaurant with $30 and a prayer. A billionaire had been dining with her daughter, both of them lonely despite having everything money could buy. A little girl had seen what the adults couldn't. That sometimes the most important connections happen when you're not looking for them. And now they were family. Imperfect, unconventional, and absolutely perfect for each other. The fairy tale was complete, but the real story, the daily choice to love and be loved, to build something beautiful together, was just beginning. I'm literally sobbing happy tears right now. What a perfect ending to the most beautiful love story. Daniel and Victoria proved that love really can conquer all, not because it's easy, but because it's worth fighting for. Their journey from that first nervous dinner to this perfect family moment shows us that sometimes the best things in life come when we're brave enough to open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. Thank you so much for taking this incredible journey with me. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will make you believe in love again. And drop a comment below. I want to hear which moment made you cry the happiest tears. Until next time, keep believing in fairy tales, because sometimes they really do come true.